Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Brett Smith, and let me provide a brief background context for my talk. I'm a Professor of Disability and Physical Activity at Durham University and the Director of Research in the Department of Sport and Exercise Sciences. I'm also the President of the International Society of Qualitative Research in Sport and Exercise, an appointed member of the Chief Medical Officer's Physical Activity Expert Group for Communications, and work each week with Disability Rights UK on the Sport England Tackling Inequalities Fund, supporting user-led disability organisations in their local communities to get disabled people active and stay active. Now, against that backdrop, it will perhaps come as no surprise that I've been passionate about equality, diversity, inclusion for many years. I want here to focus, though, on three areas that I've been working on. First, for several years with colleagues, we've been conducting research on parasport and activism. We've been asking such questions as, do Paralympians engage in activism? If so, how, when, where, and why do they engage in activism? What are the different ways that Paralympians engage in activism? And why do they not engage in activism? Such questions are incredibly timely. For example, the International Paralympic Committee has recently launched the new strategic plan. And one key strategy in that new plan is that they, and in turn, and importantly, call on national governing bodies and their employees, including sports psychologists, to cultivate a generation of Paralympic athletes to act as advocates for disability rights. To quote, again, to cultivate a generation of para-athletes to act as advocates for disability rights. This is vital because disabled people are frequently subjected to what's known as disableism. And what is disableism? Well, it's to say that disabled people are oppressed and discriminated daily in society, with many spaces and opportunities restricted to them by society. In other words, their human rights in the UK are violated constantly. And the International Paralympic Committee strategy is also timely because the disabled peer and retired Paralympian Dame Tanni Gray-Thompson warned last month that she has lost patience with progress on disability rights and will scream in the face of the next person who tells her London 2012 changed the world for disabled people. Simply, the evidence from disabled people's user group-led organisations has consistently found that London 2012 did little for disabled people. But you may be asking right now, how does sports psychology fit into parasport and cultivating a generation of para-athletes to act as advocates for disabled rights, to be activists? Some of you may alternatively be saying that sports psychology has nothing to do with all of this. Our job, of course, is about human performance and mental health. It is not about creating an environment in which a generation of para-athletes can act as advocates for disabled rights. But my point is this. It is sports psychology and sports psychologists' responsibility to take activism in parasport very seriously. There is evidence in journals like Psychology of Sport and Exercise for why this is vital, including for para-athletes themselves. It is our job to engage in conversations about disability rights with organisations and para-athletes we work with. To be silent about all this is to be complicit in the continuation of discrimination that disabled people face. Or let me put it slightly differently. You may say that discrimination is bad and you want it all over. But the implementation and the facts of that require you to do things. If you are not willing to do things, that is where another problem lies. I therefore call on sports psychologists to do things. Doing things like, for example, working with athletes and organisations to support social justice initiatives is, of course, no easy task. It will, of course, as well, also appeal to some sports psychologists more than others, for reasons tied to how you were trained, your values, your motivations, your dispositions to change, and your courage, just to name a few possible reasons. But for those who are open to a conversation, perhaps after this conference, we might seriously turn to what and how we might do things. This leads me to a second area. Recently, my role as Director of Research in the Department of Sport and Exercise Sciences at Durham and President of the International Society of Qualitative Research in Sport and Exercise, I brought together many societies, including the BPS Division of Sport and Exercise Psychology, to discuss how collectively we might work together. There are now over 25 societies involved in this conversation. The national international societies span different disciplines from around the globe. And this is the first time that so many societies have come together from different disciplines to collectively work together. And the issue of importance that we've recently discussed and we've settled on to collectively work on is EDI. We'll be moving forward with this in 2021. And what activities we might engage in could include sharing EDI policies and resources with each other, as various societies have none or only just developing them. We may also advance a set of EDI principles for societies to collectively commit to or to be guided by in their development. A collective statement on EDI for societies to subscribe to commit to and progress towards is another possibility. And a further one is a crib sheet for good practices in order to collate knowledge and share learning among societies, and a strategy or model to measure success by. We're also discussing how all of this can help support societies in not just talking about social justice, but in acting also social justice. These, of course, are lofty ambitions. We're in no doubt that there are many challenges ahead, but the fact that 25 societies from across the globe have identified EDI as vital and necessary to advance is an excellent start. So thank you to everybody involved, and watch this space moving forward. And I think what's important to know is that the BPS Sport and Exercise Psychological section should be proud of themselves for moving this forward and putting key members forward to be part of a working group that has just been set up to advance ideas that I've already highlighted. So thank you particularly to the BPS Sport and Exercise Psychological section. But bringing it back to disability, the third and final area I want to address is sedentary behaviour messaging. Communicating physical activity recommendations and how to reduce sedentary time often includes simple but compelling messages. And of course, this comes at the time when the World Health Organization have recently put forth their physical activity guidelines. Now, it's interesting when we look at physical activity messages that, particularly within the UK, there are messages such as these: stand up, sit less. Sit less, move more. Chairs are killers. Time to take a stand against inactivity. Get Britain standing. On your feet, Britain. Now is the time to get up and get moving. And just to throw another one out that is being used by organisations, public health, etc., swap sitting for moving. However, such messages are ableist. What is ableism? Well, ableism is a form of prejudice and discrimination in which non-disabled people are viewed as normal, in quotation marks, and superior to disabled people. The cited messages that I've highlighted that are used, and including by sports psychologists and exercise psychologists, are infused with ableism because they favour certain bodies. For example, those that can stand or easily avoid sitting. They reinforce an ideal standard for mental health, intellect, and health, while stigmatizing, alienating, and excluding others. For example, wheelchair users, those in chronic pain, or with mental health conditions and intellectual and developmental disabilities that find sitting or lying beneficial for their well-being. So a message like sit less, move more is a form of prejudice and discrimination. And if we continue to use such messages, even if unintentionally, we are stigmatizing and harming disabled people. I say all this as another call for action. Messages calling individuals to sit less and stand or move more must be dropped more, and alternative, more inclusive messages such as don't be still for too long, be active your own way, enjoy moving your body more, unplug and play, and remember to move your body often are just a few examples of how we might progress working with disabled people to co-construct some messages, as I've offered some there that have been co-constructed with disabled individuals. But of course, listeners yourselves might respond to this call for action to drop messages like sit less, move more by insisting, I don't mean to be ableist when I use them. And of course, it's no big deal. It's just language. I hear this frequently, as in many other counters to this. But let's take this. Well, I appreciate that the intended goal of such messages is to reduce sedentary time and promote health, not ableism. However, language acts in the world and on people. It perpetuates taken for granted beliefs and values. It creates, reveals and reproduces forms of prejudice and discrimination. Language is where people live, and ableist language is not livable for disabled people. Imagining living in terms that exclude you and assume a lesser status for you. Language paints a picture of our world and the people in it, acting on them. Imagine painting a picture that sends a public health message that excludes an entire group of people, that acts on them by saying consciously or unconsciously, you are not part of our health policy. What does that also suggest to non-disabled people? And given unconscious biases, how might it be played out in everyday life? Could it be that disabled people are unintentionally considered inferior and not worth caring about? Now, if you doubt the capacity of language to oppress and discriminate, then consider the damaging impacts of racist, homophobic, ageist, or sexist language in society. It is necessary for language to evolve as society does, such as moving away from racial stereotypes in advertising or reclaiming former homophobic slurs such as queer for empowered self-identification. Just as language has adapted in an attempt to stop perpetuating racism, sexism, and homophobia and transphobia, we must also now change our language to stop perpetuating ableism. As part of tackling health inequalities and bringing intersectionality into our work, we must include disability much more in physical activity and sport psychological work, and work against disableism and ableism. So as part of our call for action, I call on others to speak out and challenge ableist messages like stand up, sit less, and move more. Let the messenger gently know that their messages are ableist, even unintentionally so. Describe the reasons why and offer suitable alternatives. I also, with my colleagues at Disability Rights UK, I also call on people, research groups, organisations and public health agencies to change their messages if they promote ableism. And importantly, work with disabled people to co-produce appropriate messages, to co-produce sport and exercise psychology programs. These are small acts, but they can make a big difference. Thank you for listening. Take care and happy holidays.